Welcome to Cheaters Theater. Over 95% of you watch without subscribing. Please like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell. And tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Let's begin. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody mentions that preparing it requires the patience of a professional and the instincts of a hunter. I learned that the hard way when I discovered my wife was involved with her boss. And instead of falling apart over it like some pathetic fool, I decided to dismantle his entire empire and claim the one thing he thought was untouchable. His wife turned out to be the nuclear option I never knew I needed. And by the time I was done, both of them were pleading in ways that still make me smile when I think about it on quiet nights. My name is Cole Bennett, and I'm the guy corporations call when they need to bury scandals so deep that even forensic accountants can't trace the damage. I've spent 14 years in crisis management and corporate security, which means I know exactly how to spot a lie, track digital footprints, and ruin someone's life using nothing but their own mistakes. The irony is that all those skills I used to protect companies ended up being the exact tools I needed when my own world went sideways. Boston winters are brutal, but nothing chills you quite like realizing the woman you married is laughing at you behind your back while some silver-haired executive treats her like she's disposable. It started on a Thursday in November when I came back to our penthouse a day early from a business trip to Washington. I had wrapped up negotiations with a biotech company faster than expected. Some insider trading mess they needed contained before the SEC could start asking questions. The flight back was smooth, and I decided not to call Lauren because I wanted to surprise her with the limited edition Chanel bag I had picked up at the airport boutique. She had been dropping hints about it for weeks, and despite everything, I still believed in making her happy. That shows you how blind a man can be when he chooses comfort over vigilance. The moment I walked into our place, something felt wrong. You develop instincts in my line of work. A sixth sense for when environments have been disturbed. The air held traces of expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Something woody with notes of bergamot that probably cost $250 an ounce. One of the dining chairs was pulled out at an odd angle, and there was a damp spot on the Persian rug near the couch that hadn't been there when I left. These weren't massive red flags to most people, but I've trained myself to notice the details that others miss. It's how I've caught embezzlers, cheating executives, and corporate spies for over a decade. I set down my luggage quietly and walked through the apartment methodically, cataloging every anomaly. The bedroom was immaculate, which itself was suspicious because Lauren usually left clothes scattered around when she was alone. The bathroom counter had 2 wine glasses in the sink instead of 1. And the expensive Bordeaux I had been saving for our anniversary was half empty. My heart started beating faster, not from panic, but from that cold professional focus that kicks in when you realize you're in hostile territory. I checked the security camera footage from my phone, but someone had been smart enough to disable it remotely. That required technical knowledge Lauren didn't have, which meant whoever she was with knew what they were doing. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, which was a mistake on her part. Lauren was usually glued to that device like it was a life support system, constantly checking messages and social media. I picked it up and felt the familiar weight of it in my hand, knowing that in about 30 seconds I would either confirm my paranoia or feel like an idiot for doubting her. The passcode was our anniversary date, which now felt like a cosmic joke. I got into her messages faster than a teenager bypassing parental controls, and what I found there made my blood turn to ice water. Months of messages between her and Victor Callaway, her boss, and the CEO of Callaway Media. The man was a legend in Boston business circles, one of those self-made billionaires who owned half the city's media outlets and had politicians on speed dial. I had met him twice at company events, shaken his hand, made small talk about market trends while he looked at me with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. He was 52 years old, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing watches that cost more than most people's cars. And apparently he had been with my wife more times than I could count based on the suggestive messages filling her phone. But it wasn't just the affair that hit me. I've seen enough corporate scandals to know that powerful men cheat. It's practically a requirement in their social circles. What burned was the contempt in their messages. The way they laughed about me behind my back. Victor called me the guard dog and your boring husband who thinks he's tough. Lauren complained that I was too rigid and emotionally unavailable, that I cared more about work than her feelings. She told him I was adequate in bed, but predictable, which was a detail I could have lived without knowing. They mocked my clothes, my habits, even the way I preferred bourbon over wine. Reading those messages was like watching a video of your own execution and realizing the people holding the weapons were the ones you trusted most. I sat on the edge of the bed holding her phone, and something shifted inside me. The old Cole Bennett, the one who believed in marriage vows and second chances, died in that moment. What replaced him was the predator I had always kept caged for work. The part of me that knew how to identify weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. Divorce would be too simple, too clean. Victor Calloway had everything: money, power, a beautiful wife, a media empire that made him untouchable. He thought he could take what was mine and face no consequences because men like him never do. But he made one critical mistake. He went after someone who makes a living destroying people professionally. And now he had given me both motive and justification. I spent the next 2 hours going through every message, screenshot, and photo they had exchanged. The affair had been going on for 8 months, starting at a corporate retreat in Vail where Lauren had been too drunk and Victor had been too available. They met in his office, in hotel rooms, even once in our vacation home in Cape Cod when I was supposedly on a client call. The level of deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness. She had lied about working late, about girls' weekends, about business trips that never happened. Every kiss goodbye, every I love you she had given me during those 8 months was contaminated with betrayal. But buried in those messages was something even more valuable than proof of infidelity. Victor had been careless, discussing business matters he shouldn't have put in writing. He mentioned moving money from his wife's charitable foundation to cover gambling debts, complained about the board of directors questioning his expenses, bragged about insider trading that the SEC would love to know about. This wasn't just an affair. It was a roadmap to his destruction. And his wife, Dana, the former prosecutor who now ran that charitable foundation, had no idea her husband was robbing her blind to fund his addiction to high-stakes poker games and private clubs. I heard the elevator ding in the hallway and quickly put Lauren's phone back exactly where I had found it. The door opened, and she walked in carrying shopping bags from Newberry Street. Her blonde hair perfect, her designer dress probably paid for with money Victor had given her. She looked surprised to see me, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, fear, and then forced happiness in about 2 seconds. That's when I knew she was aware on some level that she had been sloppy, that the walls were closing in. "Cole, oh my God, you're home early." She rushed over to kiss me, and I let her, tasting the lie on her lips while my mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning her destruction. "I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow night. Did the Philadelphia deal close early?" "Washington," I corrected her calmly. "And yes, they signed faster than expected once I showed them what would happen if they didn't." I studied her face, noting the micro-expressions she couldn't quite hide. Guilt, anxiety, relief that I was playing along. "Picked you up something at the airport. It's in my bag." She squealed appropriately and dove for the Chanel bag like it was Christmas morning, and I felt absolutely nothing watching her happiness. This woman had shared my bed for 6 years, knew my coffee order, had met my dying father in the hospital, and she could lie to my face without a single crack in her performance. I realized then that I had never truly known her at all, that I had been in love with a carefully constructed illusion designed to extract resources and status from my life. We had dinner together that night, some expensive sushi she had ordered from our favorite place downtown. She talked about her day, complained about deadlines and difficult clients, mentioned Victor's name 3 times in casual conversation like she was testing me to see if I would react. I smiled, nodded, asked follow-up questions, played the role of the supportive husband while internally calculating the exact sequence of moves that would leave both her and her lover with nothing. She had no idea she was sitting across from a loaded weapon with the safety off. That night in bed, she tried to initiate intimacy, and I had to dig deep into my professional training not to recoil from her touch. I made excuses about being exhausted from travel, about an early morning meeting I had to prepare for. She looked hurt for about 5 seconds before rolling over and checking her phone, probably texting Victor about how I was too tired for her again. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to her breathe, planning the systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed me while she slept peacefully beside me like a snake coiled in warm blankets. The next morning, I didn't go to my office. Instead, I drove to the industrial side of Boston where my old connections from before the corporate world still operated. There's a whole ecosystem of information brokers, cybersecurity specialists, and digital forensics experts who work in the gray areas that legitimate firms won't touch. I had helped several of them avoid legal problems over the years, which meant they owed me favors that could be called in without questions. The kind of favors that involved breaking into secure servers and extracting information that could end careers. Adrian Holt ran a small operation out of a converted warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside, but housed millions of dollars in computing equipment inside. He was a genius with digital systems, the kind of guy who could probably access federal databases if he wanted to, but preferred the lower profile of corporate espionage. I had gotten him out of a situation 4 years ago involving some cryptocurrency theft charges that would have put him away for 18 years. He took one look at my face when I walked in and knew I wasn't there for a social call. "Cole Bennett, you've got that look," he said, spinning around in his chair, surrounded by monitors displaying code I couldn't begin to understand. "Someone needs to disappear digitally, or you need dirt on somebody important." "Both," I replied, laying out exactly what I needed. "I want complete access to Victor Callaway's private servers, his financial records, his communications, everything that he thinks is secure behind corporate firewalls and encryption. And I need it yesterday, without any traces leading back to me or you." Adrian whistled low. "Victor Callaway, man, you don't think small. That's Callaway Media we're talking about. Their security is probably military grade. This is going to cost you big time and take at least a few days to crack without triggering alarms." "You've got 36 hours, I said, sliding an envelope across his desk containing $45,000 in cash. "And there's another 45 when you deliver. His wife's charitable foundation, too. I need to see where the money's really going." He counted the bills quickly, his eyes lighting up with that mixture of greed and professional challenge that makes people like him dangerous and useful in equal measure. "For this kind of money, I'll have it for you by tomorrow night. But Cole, if this blows back on either of us, we're both finished. Whatever he did to you must be serious." "He took something that wasn't his," I said simply. "Now I'm taking everything." I spent the rest of that day at my actual office going through the motions of work while my mind was entirely focused on the war I was waging in secret. My assistant brought me files to review. Clients called with crises that suddenly seemed trivial compared to my own situation. I approved strategies, made decisions, signed off on settlements, all while thinking about how Lauren was probably in Victor's office at that exact moment, doing things that would have destroyed me a week ago. But I wasn't that person anymore. That version of Cole Bennett, who believed in fairness and playing by rules, had been cremated and scattered like ashes in Boston Harbor. By 6:30 in the evening, Adrian called. "You're not going to believe what I found. This guy is filthier than anyone suspected. Where do you want me to send the files?" "Encrypted email, the address I gave you." "And Adrian, you never saw any of this." "Saw what?" he replied, and I knew he understood the gravity of what we were dealing with. The files came through an hour later, and I spent the entire night in my home office going through them with the same focus I used on major corporate investigations. Lauren knocked on the door around 9:30 asking if I wanted dinner, and I told her I was busy with a client emergency. She sighed dramatically and went back to watching reality TV in the living room, probably texting Victor about what an absent husband I was while I built the bomb that would wipe out both their lives. What I found in those files was beautiful in its incriminating detail. Victor wasn't just having an affair. He was running a criminal enterprise disguised as a media company. He had been systematically embezzling from Dana's charitable foundation for 4 years, moving money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands to cover gambling debts that exceeded $2 per million. There were emails discussing payoffs to journalists for favorable coverage, evidence of insider trading with board members, and communications proving he had been involved with at least 6 different employees over the past decade, including 2 who had signed NDAs and received settlement payments. But the most valuable piece of information was buried in his personal calendar. Victor had a standing appointment every Thursday afternoon at an exclusive shooting range in the suburbs, and his wife Dana had a matching appointment. They went separately, never together, which suggested their marriage was even more hollow than mine. That meant Dana Callaway spent Thursday afternoons shooting targets while her husband ran around destroying lives. And if I knew anything about former prosecutors, They appreciated evidence and despised being played for fools. I had never met Dana Calloway properly, only seen her at charity events where she moved through crowds with the grace of someone who knew exactly what people said about her behind her back. She was 44 years old, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had prosecuted real criminals and won. Dark hair, sharp features, expensive clothes that suggested old money rather than new. The kind of woman who probably knew her husband was trash, but had been waiting for the right moment to act. Thursday came quickly. I told Lauren I had meetings all day and watched her face light up, knowing she would immediately call Victor to arrange an afternoon at whatever hotel they were using that week. I drove out to the shooting range in the suburbs, a private facility that catered to wealthy individuals who wanted to practice without the hassle of public ranges and prying eyes. The membership fee alone was $18,000 a year, which told me everything about the clientele. I found Dana Calloway in Lane 7 working through a magazine on a Sig Sauer with the kind of precision that comes from serious training. She was wearing designer athletic wear and shooting glasses, her form perfect as she put round after round into the center mass of the paper target downrange. I waited until she was reloading before approaching, knowing that interrupting someone with a loaded weapon was a good way to get hurt. "Dana Calloway," I said, and she turned to look at me with eyes that immediately assessed whether I was a threat. "Cole Bennett, we met briefly at the Children's Health fundraiser last year." "I remember," she said coolly, setting down her weapon with the safety engaged. "You're in corporate crisis management. Your wife works for my husband." The way she said my husband carried enough ice to freeze the harbor, and I knew in that moment she suspected more than she had let on. "Can we talk somewhere private? I have information you need to see, and I promise you'll want to hear this before you finish your session." She studied me for a long moment, and I could see her prosecutor instincts analyzing my body language, my tone, looking for deception. Whatever she saw must have convinced her, because she nodded once and led me to a private conference room the range kept for members. We sat down across from each other, and I pulled out a folder containing printouts of financial records, screenshots of messages, and a complete breakdown of her husband's criminal activities. "Your husband is involved with my wife," I said without preamble, sliding the evidence across the table. "They've been having an affair for 8 months, but that's not why I'm here. Victor has been embezzling from your charitable foundation to cover gambling debts and pay off former mistresses. He's moved over $2.1 million through offshore accounts. And if I can find it, federal prosecutors can too. He's been using your reputation as a shield while he commits crimes that would put him away for years." Dana's face remained completely neutral as she went through the documents, but her hands tightened on the papers until her knuckles turned white. She read every page methodically, her legal training evident in how she absorbed information and cross-referenced details. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was carved from stone. "Why bring this to me instead of the authorities?" "Because I want more than justice," I replied honestly. "I want total destruction. Your husband took something from me while mocking me behind my back, thinking he was untouchable because of his money and power. But he made the mistake of underestimating who I am and what I'm capable of doing. And you, Dana, you're not just his wife. You're the owner of 48% of Calloway Media stock through your family trust. You're the nuclear option." She set down the papers and walked back to her shooting lane, picked up her weapon, loaded a fresh magazine, and fired 14 rounds into a new target with mechanical precision. Every single shot hit center mass in a grouping that could be covered by a playing card. When she was done, she ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and turned back to me with a smile that would have unsettled lesser men. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Bennett?" "An alliance. We don't just divorce our cheating spouses, we destroy them completely, financially, socially, professionally. We take everything they have and leave them with nothing. And along the way, we make them believe we're doing exactly what they did to us, which will drive them insane with paranoia and jealousy." "You want to fake an affair to destabilize them," she said, catching on immediately. "Make them make mistakes while we position ourselves to take everything." "Exactly. I've spent 14 years learning how to dismantle people professionally. You spent 9 years prosecuting criminals and understanding how to build cases they can't escape. Together, we're a weapon they can't defend against." Dana walked back over and extended her hand. "Let's meet tomorrow to discuss details. I'm assuming you have a plan." "I have several plans," I replied, shaking her hand. The question is which level of destruction you're comfortable with. Mr. Bennett, I spent 9 years putting violent criminals in prison. I'm comfortable with total annihilation as long as it's legal. Mostly legal. We met the following evening at a steakhouse in Back Bay that I knew had private rooms and management that valued discretion over gossip. Dana arrived dressed in a way that suggested power rather than seduction. A black dress and jewelry that were old family pieces rather than flashy purchases. We ordered expensive wine and ribeyes that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. And we talked about destruction like other couples might discuss vacation plans. Victor knows I'm aware of his previous affairs, Dana explained, swirling her wine glass. What he doesn't know is that I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. I stayed because divorce without leverage would have left me with half of nothing once his lawyers finished hiding assets. But if he's been stupid enough to commit actual crimes that I can prove, then everything changes. And your wife? She asked. What's her story? I leaned back, considering how much to share. Lauren is a narcissist who confused luxury with love and thought I was too emotionally distant to notice her betrayal. She works in PR, which means she's good at creating illusions and terrible at understanding when someone is playing a longer game. Right now, she thinks she's being clever, but she's actually walking into a trap she helped build. What's phase 1? Financial pressure. I'm cutting off Lauren's access to our joint accounts under the guise of a bank audit. She's used to spending freely, and without money, she becomes unstable and takes it out on Victor. Meanwhile, you and I start being seen together publicly. Nothing overtly romantic, but enough to make people wonder and talk. Victor's ego can't handle the idea that you might be moving on, and Lauren will panic, thinking she's losing control. Dana smiled. I like it. Psychological warfare before the actual assault. When do we start? Tonight. I'll freeze the accounts tomorrow morning. You and I need to be seen leaving here together. Let the gossip machines do their work. We spent 3 hours planning every detail, and I realized I was sitting across from someone who thought exactly like me. There was no emotion in our discussion, no anger or hurt feelings, just cold calculation about how to maximize damage while maintaining plausible deniability. It was refreshing in a disturbing way, like finding someone who spoke a language nobody else understood. When we finally left the restaurant, I made sure we were seen by at least 3 people who ran in Boston social circles, including a photographer from a society blog who practically tripped over himself getting shots of us walking to our cars together. The next morning, I called our bank and had them flag our joint accounts for suspicious activity, which meant Lauren's credit cards would be declined until the investigation was complete. It was pure fiction, but banks are paranoid enough about fraud that they'll lock down accounts without much explanation. I made sure to do this right before her usual Friday shopping trip with her friends, a weekly ritual where they burned through thousands of dollars at boutiques on Boylston Street. Lauren called me at noon, her voice hitting frequencies that probably bothered dogs 2 blocks away. Cole, my card isn't working. The bank is saying there's a hold on our accounts. I'm standing in Chanel with 3 bags. I can't buy anything, and the sales associate is looking at me like I'm some kind of fraud. The bank called me this morning about unusual activity patterns, I said calmly, reviewing a contract for a client while she had a meltdown. They need to verify some transactions before releasing the holds. It's probably nothing, but you know how paranoid financial institutions get these days. Should be cleared up in a week or so. A week or so? Cool. I need access to money now. I have things I need to buy. Do you actually need them, or do you want them? There's a difference, Lauren. Maybe try using the emergency credit card for essentials until this gets sorted out. The emergency card had a $600 limit, which was barely enough for groceries, let alone the designer lifestyle she had become accustomed to. She hung up on me, which was fine because I had work to do anyway. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Your package is live and spreading. ETA 14 hours until critical mass. That meant the information I had carefully leaked to certain financial journalists about irregularities at Callaway Media was starting to circulate in the places that mattered. By tomorrow morning, Victor would be dealing with phone calls from board members and investors wanting answers he couldn't easily provide. That night was the annual Children's Health Charity Gala, one of those events where Boston's elite got together to write checks and feel good about themselves while wearing clothes that cost more than most people's annual income. Lauren had been excited about this for weeks, seeing it as an opportunity to show off and network. She had bought a new dress before the accounts were frozen, thank God, because otherwise this would have been even more unpleasant for her. We arrived at the Harborview Ballroom fashionably late, and I could see Lauren was already on edge from the financial situation. She kept checking her phone, probably texting Victor for reassurance, not knowing that he was about to have a very different kind of evening than either of them expected. The room was filled with the usual suspects: politicians, business owners, old money families, and the kind of people who considered a $100,000 donation to be a rounding error. Victor was holding court near the bar, surrounded by a circle of admirers, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny. He saw us enter, and his expression shifted microscopically enough that I noticed even if nobody else did. He was smart enough to be worried about me, but arrogant enough to think he was still in control. I excused myself from Lauren and walked directly toward him with the kind of confidence that makes people move out of your way instinctively. "Victor," I said, extending my hand. He took it because to refuse would have been a scene, and I squeezed just hard enough that he felt the pressure in his joints. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that he knew I could hurt him if I wanted to. His smile never wavered, but his eyes showed a flash of pain. "Glad I caught you. I've been meaning to discuss some security protocols for media companies. You know how vulnerable digital infrastructure can be these days. One wrong click, and suddenly everything you thought was private becomes very public." "Always good to see you, Cole," he replied, extracting his hand and probably checking to see if I'd bruised it. "I'm sure our security team has everything handled. We're quite thorough." "I'm sure you are," I said, leaning in just slightly. "But sometimes the threats come from inside, don't they? People you trust having access to things they shouldn't. You'd be amazed what a skilled professional can find when they're motivated." His face went pale, but before he could respond, Dana materialized beside us wearing a dress that probably cost more than a used car. She looked magnificent, every inch the sophisticated woman who didn't need her husband's money or status. She glanced at Victor like he was furniture, then turned to me with genuine warmth. "Cole, I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to discuss that foundation audit we talked about. Can I steal you for a moment?" She linked her arm through mine without waiting for an answer, and I felt Victor's eyes burning holes in my back as we walked away together. Lauren was watching from across the room, her expression confused and slightly panicked. She had seen her boss's wife, a woman she barely knew, just walk off with her husband looking entirely too comfortable together. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew it would grow like a tumor in her mind. Dana and I spent the next 20 minutes talking animatedly in a corner, occasionally laughing at things that weren't particularly funny, making sure we were visible to everyone who mattered. "You're good at this," Dana murmured behind her wine glass. "The performance, I mean. Most men would be chest-thumping and making scenes by now." "Emotional displays are inefficient," I replied, "and they warn your targets that something is wrong. Better to smile while you're twisting the blade. Makes it hurt more when they finally realize what's happening." We circulated separately for a while, and I watched Victor try to approach his wife, only to have her walk away each time. She was executing her role perfectly, creating the appearance of distance and dissatisfaction without overtly humiliating him. Lauren kept trying to catch my attention, but I was too busy networking and acting like I didn't have a care in the world. By the end of the evening, I could see her practically vibrating with anxiety, and Victor looked like he wanted to lash out at someone. The next morning, I got the call I had been waiting for. One of Victor's board members, a venture capitalist named Vanessa Pierce, who I had helped during her own corporate scandal, wanted to meet for coffee. She was concerned about rumors circulating regarding financial irregularities at Callaway Media and wanted to know if I had heard anything in my circles. I told her I'd be happy to discuss what I knew, and we set up a meeting for that afternoon at a cafe downtown where we definitely wouldn't be overheard by anyone who mattered. Vanessa was in her 50s, ruthlessly intelligent and paranoid enough that she had made a fortune in Silicon Valley before moving back to Boston. She didn't do small talk, just ordered a double espresso and got straight to business. "Cole, I've known you for 6 years, and I trust your judgment. There are whispers about Victor moving money in ways that don't make sense. His wife's foundation has been audited by their accounting firm, and apparently there are discrepancies nobody can explain, combined with his recent behavior and some concerning communications that have leaked. I'm wondering if we have a serious problem." You have a serious problem, I confirmed. I've seen evidence of systematic embezzlement from the charitable foundation, offshore accounts being used to hide gambling losses, and a pattern of behavior that suggests Victor thinks he's above consequences. If I were on that board, I'd be calling an emergency meeting and demanding answers before the SEC gets involved. She leaned back, her face grim. Can you prove any of this? I can point you in the right direction. The rest is up to your forensic accountants and whatever leverage you need to apply to make him cooperate. But Vanessa, if this goes public before you handle it internally, Callaway Media's stock will crater and everyone associated with the company will be damaged. You need to move fast. How fast? By Thursday, call an emergency board meeting. Present the evidence. Force him out before he can destroy more value. And between you and me, his wife, Dana, has been gathering evidence of his misconduct for years. She might be a valuable ally in this. Vanessa pulled out her phone and started making calls before I even finished my coffee. The machine was in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Victor's empire was about to come crashing down around his ears, and he wouldn't even know who to blame because the attack was coming from every direction simultaneously. That evening, Lauren came home in tears. Victor had called her into his office and accused her of leaking confidential information to the press, shouting at her about loyalty and betrayal in ways that probably violated several employment laws. Their affair was fracturing under pressure exactly as I had predicted, because people like them only value each other when things are easy. The second there's real danger, they turn on each other like rats in a sinking ship. He thinks I betrayed him, she sobbed, makeup running down her face in a way that would have devastated me a month ago. Now I just felt cold satisfaction. He's saying I'm the reason the board is investigating, that I must have accessed files I wasn't supposed to see. Cole, I could lose my job over this. Did you access files you weren't supposed to? I asked mildly, knowing the answer but enjoying making her squirm. Of course not. But he doesn't believe me. And now everyone at the office is looking at me like I'm some kind of corporate spy. This is a nightmare. Maybe you should consider whether working for Victor is worth all this stress, I suggested. There are other PR firms in Boston, better ones probably. She looked at me like I had suggested she cut off her own arm. I've worked too hard to build my reputation at Callaway Media to just walk away. No, this will blow over once Victor realizes I had nothing to do with whatever investigation is happening. I almost felt sorry for her, thinking she still had a future at that company or with Victor. She had no idea that within 72 hours both would be gone from her life permanently. Instead of explaining this, I simply nodded and went to my office, leaving her to cry alone in our living room while I finalized the next phase of the operation. Thursday arrived with the kind of cold clarity that December in Boston specializes in. Wind off the harbor, cutting through everything without mercy. I had spent the morning reviewing contracts for a pharmaceutical merger, but my mind was on the emergency board meeting happening at Callaway Media headquarters. Vanessa had called the night before to confirm that they had all the evidence they needed, including testimony from Dana that would be impossible for Victor to refute. His reign was ending today, and he didn't even know it yet. Lauren left for work early, probably hoping to patch things up with Victor before everything imploded. I almost called to warn her not to go in, but decided that witnessing his downfall firsthand would be more educational. She needed to see what happened to men who thought they were invincible and how quickly their empires could crumble when the right pressure was applied. By noon, my phone started buzzing with messages from various contacts in the Boston business scene. Victor Callaway had been fired, forced out by the board with security escorting him from the building. His corporate access revoked, his executive parking space reassigned, his empire stripped away in less time than it took to eat lunch. The official story was pursuing other opportunities, but everyone knew that meant he had been caught doing something so bad that keeping him would have destroyed the company's value completely. I sent a single text to Dana. Phase 2 complete. Phase 3 begins now. Her response came back instantly, already in motion. Meet me at the office at 3. Callaway Media headquarters was in the financial district, a glass tower that reflected the sky and seemed to touch the clouds. I had been there twice before for events, but walking in today felt different, like entering conquered territory. Dana was waiting in what had been Victor's executive office, except now all his personal items were gone, and her belongings were moving in. She stood by the window overlooking downtown Boston, the December sun making her look like some kind of warrior queen surveying her domain. The board appointed me interim CEO an hour ago, she said without turning around. They want fresh leadership while they search for a permanent replacement. I told them I'd consider the role long-term if the crisis management consultant I hired can stabilize the company. That consultant is you, Cole. Congratulations on your new job. I walked over to stand beside her, looking out at the city that had been our battlefield. When do I start? Monday. The board approved a 6-month contract at your standard rate, plus a performance bonus tied to stock price recovery. You'll have full access to everything, and I mean everything. Every file, every system, every piece of data Victor thought was hidden. If there's more dirt to find, you'll find it. And we'll use it to insulate ourselves from any fallout. And your dear husband, where is he right now? Probably in his apartment, drunk and furious, trying to figure out who destroyed him. His lawyers called wanting to negotiate a settlement, but I told them to go through my attorneys and expect nothing. I'm filing for divorce Monday morning, citing adultery, fraud, and whatever else my legal team can think of. Between the prenup and his criminal activities, he'll be lucky to keep his watch collection. Lauren called right then, her number flashing on my screen. I let it go to voicemail, knowing she would leave a message filled with panic and confusion. When I checked it later, I heard her crying about being fired, about Victor cutting her off completely, about not understanding what had happened or why everything was falling apart. She asked if I could come get her from the office building where she was stranded, her personal items in a cardboard box, like every cliché of corporate termination. Instead of responding immediately, I let her sit with her fear for a few hours while I finished working with Dana on the transition plan. We needed to present a united front to the company, a partnership that would stabilize Callaway Media and prevent the complete collapse of shareholder value. The optics had to be perfect. The wronged wife taking control and bringing in a respected fixer to clean up her husband's mess. Wall Street would love the narrative. By the time I got home that evening, Lauren's car was in the parking garage, which meant she had somehow made it back on her own. I found her sitting on our couch surrounded by tissues, her eyes red and swollen, still wearing the designer suit she had put on that morning, thinking she was going to have a normal day. The cardboard box of her desk items sat by the door like a tombstone, marking the death of her career. They fired me, she said redundantly, as if I couldn't figure that out myself. Victor's gone too. The whole company is in chaos. Cole, I don't understand what's happening. Everything was fine last week, and now it's all falling apart. That's how it works when foundations are rotten, I replied, setting down my briefcase. Eventually, the whole structure collapses. She looked up at me with an expression that suggested she was starting to realize something was wrong, but couldn't quite connect all the dots. Why aren't you more surprised? It's like you expected this. I work in crisis management. Nothing surprises me anymore. I walked to the bar cart and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, not offering her any. The real question is what you're going to do now that you don't have a job. I'll find another position, she said with false confidence. I'm good at what I do. PR firms are always looking for experienced people. What she didn't know was that I had spent the previous week making quiet calls to every major PR firm and recruitment agency in Boston, suggesting that Lauren Bennett had been involved in the scandal at Callaway Media and would be a liability to hire. Nothing actionable, just friendly warnings from one professional to another. Her name was already poison in this industry, and she wouldn't figure that out until she started applying places and receiving polite rejections. You should update your resume, I suggested, and maybe consider that dress code expenses might need to be adjusted until you secure new employment. Things are going to be tight for a while. Tight? Cole, we have money. You make good money. Why are you acting like this is some kind of financial crisis? Because you've been spending like someone who has 2 incomes, and now we don't. Your access to the joint accounts is still limited pending the bank investigation. And frankly, watching our budget is probably smart right now. Lots of economic uncertainty in the market. I could see her starting to panic, the reality of her situation beginning to crystallize in her mind. No job, no access to money, no Victor to run to because he was dealing with his own catastrophic problems. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in faster than she could process. The weekend was tense. Lauren spent most of it on her phone applying for jobs and getting increasingly frustrated when she didn't hear back immediately. I spent it at Dana's office preparing for my new role, going through files and building the public case that would justify all the changes we were about to make. We worked well together, two predators who understood that effective hunting required patience and precision. Sunday night, I came home late to find Lauren waiting up for me, which was unusual. She was drinking wine directly from the bottle, another sign that her carefully constructed facade was cracking. Her makeup was smudged, her hair messy, and she looked at me with an expression that mixed desperation with calculation. "We need to talk," she said, and I recognized that tone. It was the voice she used when she wanted something and planned to manipulate me into giving it to her. "I know things have been stressful lately, and maybe I haven't been the best wife. Work has been demanding, and Victor was putting a lot of pressure on me to perform, and I just felt like you were always so focused on your career that you didn't have time for us anymore." I sat down across from her, my face completely neutral. "What are you trying to say, Lauren?" "I'm saying maybe we should try to reconnect, go away for a weekend, turn off our phones, just focus on each other like we used to. I feel like we've been drifting apart, and I don't want to lose what we have." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. She was trying to pull me back into complacency, trying to secure her position now that her other options had evaporated. If I hadn't known about the affair, this probably would have worked. I would have seen her overtures as genuine, felt guilty about being distant, agreed to the romantic getaway where she would have solidified her hold on the resources I provided. "That sounds nice," I said carefully. "But maybe we should wait until your job situation stabilizes. Expensive vacations don't make sense when we're on a single income." Her face fell, and I saw genuine fear flicker across her features. "Cole, why are you being like this? It's like you don't even care about our marriage anymore. Like I'm just some expense you're trying to cut from your budget. Is that really how you think I see you?" I asked, genuinely curious about what narrative she had constructed in her mind. "I don't know what to think. You're different lately, cold and distant, and acting like I'm some kind of burden. I need to know if we're okay, if you still love me, if this marriage still means something to you." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had shared my bed while betraying me, who had laughed at me with her lover, who was now trying to manipulate me because she had nowhere else to go. The old me would have felt conflicted, would have wondered if I was being too harsh. The new me felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "We're fine, Lauren." I lied smoothly. "I'm just stressed about work and didn't mean to make you feel neglected. Let's table the vacation idea for now and focus on getting you back into the workforce. Everything else can wait." She seemed somewhat reassured by this, enough that she went to bed without further dramatics. I stayed up late, finalizing documents that would end our marriage in the most financially devastating way possible for her. The prenup we had signed gave me enormous leverage, especially given her recent unemployment and the evidence I had of her affair. She would leave with nothing but her clothes and whatever car she could afford on her non-existent income. Monday morning arrived with the weight of finality. I woke up early, went for a run along the harbor while the city was still sleeping, and prepared myself for the day that would begin Lauren's true punishment. I came back to the apartment, showered, dressed in my best suit, and loaded 3 suitcases into my car while she was still asleep. Then I went back inside and placed a single key on the kitchen counter along with an envelope containing divorce papers and a note. "Lauren, I know about Victor. I've known for days. The locks have been changed. This key opens the door one final time, so you can collect your personal items this afternoon between 1 and 3 p.m. After that, this key will no longer work. Your attorney should contact mine to discuss the divorce, which will proceed according to the prenuptial agreement we signed. The home, cars, and all financial accounts belong solely to me. You have until the end of the month to find alternative housing. Security cameras have been installed throughout the property, so please don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. Cole." I left before she woke up, driving to my new office at Callaway Media, where real work awaited. Around 10 a.m., my phone started ringing with calls from Lauren's number. I ignored them all. Then came the texts, moving from confused to angry to desperate to bargaining. I read them with the same detachment I used when analyzing corporate communications during investigations. By noon, she was threatening to come to my office, but I had already alerted building security that she was not to be allowed access under any circumstances. At 3 p.m., my personal phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Cole, please, we need to talk about this." Lauren's voice was raw from crying. You can't just throw away 6 years of marriage without even giving me a chance to explain. I made a mistake. I know that now, but we can work through this. Please, just talk to me. There's nothing to explain, Lauren. You slept with your boss, laughed about me behind my back, and lied to my face for 8 months. Those aren't mistakes. They're choices. Choices that have consequences. But I love you. Victor meant nothing. He was just a distraction because you were always so distant and cold. I needed to feel wanted, to feel alive, and he gave me that attention when you wouldn't. If you had just been more present in our marriage, none of this would have happened. The attempt to shift blame was so predictable, it was almost boring. So this is my fault. I drove you into another man's arms because I worked too hard to provide the lifestyle you demanded. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we both made mistakes, and we can fix this if you'll just stop being so stubborn and give me another chance. I'll prove to you that I can be the wife you need, that our marriage is worth saving. Our marriage ended the first time you kissed him. Everything after that was just you living in a house that wasn't yours anymore, spending money that you no longer had access to, and existing in a relationship that was already dead. I was just waiting for the right time to bury the corpse. She started crying again. Those desperate sobs that might have moved me if I hadn't seen the messages where she called me boring and predictable. If I hadn't watched her lie to my face with practiced ease. If I hadn't spent days planning her destruction while she slept next to me thinking she was clever. Where am I supposed to go? She finally asked, her voice small and broken. I don't have money. I don't have a job. All my friends were through work, and now they won't return my calls. You're really going to throw me out with nothing? You're a grown woman with a college degree and work experience. I'm sure you'll figure something out. There are apartments in less expensive neighborhoods, jobs in service industries, government assistance programs if you qualify. You might have to sell some of those designer bags and jewelry to make rent. Consider it a lesson in self-sufficiency. You bastard, she hissed, her tone shifting from pleading to venomous. You planned this. All of it. You knew about Victor. And instead of confronting me like a normal person, you set me up to lose everything. What kind of psychopath does that? The kind who was trained to neutralize threats methodically. You wanted to play games, Lauren. You just didn't realize you were playing against someone who's been doing this professionally for 14 years now. If you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. I hung up and blocked her number, feeling absolutely nothing. The apartment key I had given her would stop working at 4 p.m., and if she tried to force her way in, the security system I had installed would alert both the police and building security. She was on her own now, which was exactly where she deserved to be. That evening, I met Dana for dinner at a downtown restaurant that required reservations weeks in advance. We had legitimate business to discuss regarding the company restructuring, but we also wanted to be seen together by the right people. The narrative we were building required that Boston's social elite understood we were a partnership, professional, possibly personal, united against the chaos Victor had created. How did Lauren take it? Dana asked over oysters and champagne, her tone conveying mild curiosity rather than genuine interest. About as well as expected. Lots of crying, attempts at manipulation, blame shifting, and threats. She's staying with a friend tonight, assuming any of her friends are willing to take her in after being associated with the Callaway media scandal. Victor tried to come to the house yesterday, she said casually, like discussing the weather. I had the police remove him for trespassing. His lawyer called threatening to sue for access to his personal property. But everything in that house belongs to me. According to the prenup, he can take his clothes and his watch collection. Everything else stays. How long until the criminal investigation starts? The board is cooperating with federal investigators. As of this morning, they're treating Victor as a rogue actor who hid his activities from oversight, which protects the company and isolates him legally. The forensic accountants found additional offshore accounts he didn't tell his lawyers about, which suggests he was planning to hide assets during the divorce. That's obstruction at minimum, potentially fraud. We discussed logistics for another hour, but underneath the professional conversation was a growing awareness that we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Not in the desperate, needy way that led to affairs, but with the cold respect of two predators who recognized their own kind. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly uninterested in pretending to be anything she wasn't. In another life, under different circumstances, I wondered if we might have been friends or enemies, probably both. The next few weeks moved quickly. I threw myself into rebuilding Callaway Media's reputation, firing executives who had enabled Victor's behavior, implementing new oversight procedures, and giving carefully scripted interviews about transparency and accountability. The stock price stabilized, then began climbing as investors realized the company was more valuable without its corrupt founder. Lauren's attempts to contact me continued through intermediaries, mutual acquaintances who thought they were helping by trying to mediate. I shut them down politely but firmly, explaining that the divorce would proceed according to the prenup and there was nothing to discuss. Her lawyer tried to challenge the agreement, claiming emotional duress and unequal bargaining power, but the prenup had been drafted by one of Boston's best family law attorneys and was airtight. I heard through various channels that she was working as a receptionist at a dental office, living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood she would have been horrified by 7 months ago. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about the severity of her fall, but then I would remember the messages where she laughed at my expense, and any sympathy evaporated like morning fog. Victor's situation was even worse. The criminal investigation expanded to include securities fraud and money laundering. His lawyers were negotiating with prosecutors for a plea deal that would keep him out of prison, but it would require forfeiting most of his remaining assets and accepting a felony conviction. His reputation was destroyed, his friends abandoning him with the speed of rats leaving a sinking ship. I heard he was living in his mother's house in the suburbs. A pathetic ending for someone who had thought himself untouchable. For months after everything exploded, I got a call from an unlisted number that showed up on my personal phone late at night. I debated not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Cole Bennett. The voice was rough, male, barely controlled rage simmering underneath. You think you're clever, don't you? Taking my company, my wife, destroying everything I built. Victor, I replied, completely unsurprised that he had finally figured it out. To be accurate, I didn't take your company. Your criminal activities and your wife's ownership stake took your company. I just helped facilitate the transition. You orchestrated this whole thing, the investigation, the board turning on me, even Lauren being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You played us all like chess pieces. Chess is actually a poor metaphor because it assumes equal starting positions and follows fixed rules. What I did was more like controlled demolition. I identified your structural weaknesses and applied precise pressure until everything collapsed. The affair was just the trigger. You built the bomb yourself over years of corruption and arrogance. You ruined me, he said, and I heard genuine menace in his voice. You took everything from me, so I have nothing left to lose. That's not true, I replied calmly. You have your freedom, at least for now. Your health, your life. Those are things people should value more carefully. So I'd recommend thinking very carefully about your next move, because the second you threaten me or anyone I care about, things will become far worse for you. And Victor, remember what I do for a living. I know how to make problems disappear professionally. Do you really want to test whether I'm bluffing? The line went quiet for a long moment. You're a monster, he finally said. No, I'm just better at this than you are. Now stop calling my phone, stop making threats, and focus on whatever sad little life you have left. If I hear you've gone near Dana, Lauren, or anyone else involved in this situation, I won't bother with polite solutions. Are we clear? He hung up without answering, which I took as agreement. I immediately forwarded the recording of the call to both my attorney and the police, documenting his threats in case he was stupid enough to follow through. Men like Victor rarely had the courage to do their own dirty work. They hired people for that. But desperate men occasionally surprised you. So I increased my security protocols and made sure Dana did the same. 4 days later, Victor tried to have me roughed up in the parking garage of my building. 3 men with baseball bats, probably hired through someone who knew someone who knew someone. They thought they were jumping a corporate executive who would curl up and beg. What they didn't know was that I had spent 4 years in Marine reconnaissance before my corporate career, that I maintained combat training because paranoia was a professional requirement, and that I had been expecting something exactly like this. The fight lasted maybe a minute. I disabled one guy with a strike to the leg that dropped him hard, broke another's arm when he swung at my head, and put the third one down with a blow that left him gasping on the concrete. Then I called the police, gave a statement about being attacked, and watched them get arrested. When the police asked why I thought someone would target me, I mentioned that I had recently been involved in a high-profile corporate takeover and that the former CEO had threatened me just days before. They checked financial records and found that all three attackers had recently deposited $4,500 into their accounts from the same shell company Victor had used for other shady transactions. The connection was obvious, and suddenly Victor had much bigger problems than just financial crimes. Conspiracy to commit assault, potentially attempted homicide, depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wanted to be. I drove straight to Victor's mother's house in the suburbs, still wearing my torn suit and with someone else's blood on my knuckles. The door opened, and there he was, looking 10 years older than when I first met him, defeat written in every line of his face. I didn't say anything, just looked at him until he understood exactly how badly he had miscalculated. "You're going to prison," I said quietly. "Not for the fraud or the embezzlement or the lies. You're going to prison because you were stupid enough to come after me after I warned you not to. The police have already connected you to those men. Your lawyers are going to abandon you because this is indefensible. And every single day you spend behind bars, I want you to remember that you did this to yourself." "Please," he said, and I had never heard a word contain so much broken desperation. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking straight. I was just so angry about losing everything. I'll tell the police it was a misunderstanding, that I never authorized anyone to hurt you." I leaned against the doorframe, my body language relaxed despite the violence of the evening. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn yourself in tomorrow morning. You're going to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit assault and accept whatever sentence they offer. You're going to liquidate every remaining asset you have and put it into a restitution fund for the people you defrauded through Dana's foundation. And then you're going to disappear from Boston forever once you finish your sentence. You won't contact me, Lauren, Dana, or anyone else involved in this situation. You'll live out whatever remains of your pathetic existence in complete obscurity. And if I don't, then I go to Plan B, which involves making sure prosecutors hear about every remaining crime you haven't been charged with yet. I have enough evidence of additional misconduct that isn't part of the current investigation to ensure you get decades instead of years. Financial crimes nobody has uncovered yet. Connections that would ruin what little remains of your family's name. I've been holding those cards in reserve, Victor. Don't make me play them." He slumped against the doorframe, completely defeated. "Why? Why did you do all this?" "So she slept with me. Big deal. People have affairs every day. You could have just divorced her and moved on with your life. Because you thought you could take from me without consequences. Because you mocked me while you betrayed me. Because you're a parasite who has spent your entire life consuming what others built and calling it success. Someone needed to stop you, and I was in the unique position to do it properly. Consider it a public service." I drove away, leaving him there, and I never saw him again in person. The news reported 10 days later that Victor Calloway had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit assault and financial fraud, accepting an 11-year prison sentence in exchange for cooperating with ongoing investigations. The last I heard, he was in a medium-security facility in western Pennsylvania, working in the prison library and trying to keep his head down. Lauren's story ended more quietly, but no less completely. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I left, with her receiving essentially nothing beyond what the law required me to give her. She moved to Scottsdale to live with her sister, taking a job in restaurant management because her reputation in corporate America was unsalvageable. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was dating some middle manager and living a life that would have horrified the woman she used to be. Part of me hoped she learned something from the experience, but mostly I just stopped thinking about her altogether. As for Dana and me, something unexpected happened. What started as a strategic alliance slowly transformed into something more genuine. We discovered that we actually enjoyed each other's company beyond the shared satisfaction of destroying our enemies. She was brilliant, funny in a dark way, completely unimpressed by displays of wealth or status. We could talk for hours about everything and nothing, debate philosophy and politics, or sit in comfortable silence while reading separate books. A year after everything ended, she asked me to move into the penthouse that used to belong to Victor, now completely redecorated to erase any trace of his presence. I agreed, not because I needed a place to live, but because I genuinely wanted to wake up next to her every morning. It wasn't the desperate, needy love that young people write songs about. It was something deeper and more sustainable, built on respect, shared values, and the knowledge that we had survived the fire together and come out stronger. Callaway Media flourished under our combined leadership, growing beyond what Victor had ever achieved because we focused on actual value creation instead of ego and corruption. Dana became the permanent CEO, one of the most respected executives in Boston business circles. I continued my crisis management consulting while serving as her unofficial strategic advisor, handling problems before they became scandals. We never got married. Neither of us saw the point after what we had been through. But we built something better than a marriage. A partnership between equals who understood that loyalty, competence, and mutual respect were worth more than any legal contract. People whispered about us at events, wondering about the exact nature of our relationship, but we never bothered clarifying. Let them speculate. Standing on that balcony overlooking nighttime Boston, the city stretching out in lights and steel and endless possibility, I sometimes thought about the man I used to be. The one who believed in playing fair, in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in turning the other cheek. That man was weak, naive, unprepared for the reality that the world was filled with predators who would consume him given the chance. Dana joined me on the balcony, bringing 2 glasses of bourbon and wearing one of my old shirts because she liked how it felt. She handed me a glass, and we stood in comfortable silence, watching the traffic flow like blood through the city's veins. "Any regrets?" she asked eventually, though I knew she already knew the answer. "None," I replied honestly. They built a house on sand and acted surprised when it collapsed. We just helped gravity do its job faster. She smiled, that predatory expression that probably scared other people but made me feel understood in a way I never had before. To gravity, then, and to knowing when to push. We clinked glasses, the crystal making that pure note that only expensive craftsmanship could produce. Below us, Boston continued its eternal dance of ambition and failure, victory and defeat, predators and prey. Lauren and Victor were out there somewhere, living diminished lives, and probably still wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had done what needed to be done, protected what was mine, and built something new from the ashes of betrayal. The city lights reflected in the glass windows behind us, and Dana leaned into my side with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she stood. No fears, no doubts, no weakness, just 2 apex predators who had found each other in the jungle and decided that hunting together was more effective than hunting alone. I had started this wanting revenge, simple and pure. What I got instead was something far better. A partnership built on honest ruthlessness rather than comfortable lies. A relationship where neither of us had to pretend to be anything other than what we were. And the satisfaction of knowing that the people who betrayed us spent every day living with the consequences of underestimating who they were dealing with. Justice might be blind, but revenge has perfect vision. And sometimes when you play the game correctly and push the right pieces at the right time, you don't just win. You rebuild the entire board in your image and rule it with someone who understands that power isn't given. It's taken by those smart enough and ruthless enough to seize it. Lauren wanted a fairy tale romance with someone who would worship her despite her betrayal. She got a studio apartment in Scottsdale and a restaurant management job. Victor wanted an empire and a collection of conquests to feed his ego. He got a prison cell and 11 years to consider where his arrogance led him. What they both failed to understand was that in the real world, the winners aren't the loudest or the flashiest. The winners are the ones who see the board clearly, move precisely, and never hesitate when it's time to remove pieces that no longer serve their purpose. I took another sip of bourbon, feeling the burn turn to warmth, and smiled at the city that had been our battlefield. Somewhere out there, people were making the same mistakes Lauren and Victor had made, thinking they were clever, believing they would face no consequences. And somewhere out there were people like Dana and me, watching and waiting and sharpening our knives for when those mistakes came into range. The wind off Boston Harbor carried the smell of coming snow, winter asserting its dominance over the city once again. But up here in our tower, with $180 million in combined assets, a company worth well over $1 billion, and the kind of relationship that most people never even imagined possible, we were untouchable. Not because we were perfect or righteous, but because we understood the fundamental truth that destroys most people when they finally learn it. The world doesn't reward virtue or punish evil. The world rewards competence and punishes weakness. Everything else is just stories people tell themselves to feel better about their powerlessness. Lauren and Victor learned that lesson the hard way, and their suffering was the foundation that Dana and I built our empire on. That might make us monsters in some people's eyes, but monsters at least survive and thrive while the civilized ones get eaten. I raised my glass to the city one more time, a silent toast to everyone who had ever underestimated me, betrayed me, or thought they could use me without consequences. Thank you for teaching me that mercy is expensive and revenge is profitable. Thank you for showing me that the only real loyalty is to yourself and to those few people who prove themselves worthy of standing beside you. Thank you for making me into someone who could build this life from the ruins of the old one. Dana clinked her glass against mine without me having to say anything because she understood exactly what I was thinking. That's what made her perfect. That dark mirror reflection of my own nature. Two predators who had found each other in the concrete jungle and decided that ruling together was more satisfying than anything else the world had to offer. And somewhere in a prison cell in Pennsylvania and a studio apartment in Scottsdale, Lauren and Victor were learning that betraying the wrong person doesn't just cost you what you had. It costs you everything you ever hoped to have, every future you ever imagined, every dream that kept you warm on cold nights. That, ultimately, was the real revenge. Not just taking what they valued, but making sure they spent every day for the rest of their lives knowing they destroyed themselves by underestimating who they were dealing with, by thinking I was soft because I didn't shout or make scenes, by mistaking my professionalism for weakness and my control for passivity. The bourbon was smooth, the night was cold, and the woman beside me was everything Lauren could never have been. Smart, strong, ruthlessly honest about what she wanted, and willing to do what was necessary to get it. We had built something beautiful from destruction, something pure from revenge, something lasting from temporary pain. I looked at Dana, and she looked back at me, and in that moment we both smiled with the satisfaction of people who had won completely. Not just the battle, but the war. Not just defeating our enemies, but absorbing their power and using it to build something greater than anything they could have imagined. That's the end of today's story. If you haven't yet, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell. What are your thoughts? Share them in the comments. We read them all. And thanks for watching. You're always welcome here.